Hey everybody, it's Fred Jacobs with Jacobs Media, and you are here for the summary of what we've learned in the last 15 years of Techsurvey's, better known as Techsurvey's greatest hits. We've got a pretty fast-moving presentation for you here, but a lot of data. And of course, all of this is designed to encourage you to sign up for the 2020 edition of Techsurvey, which I'll tell you about in a couple of moments. So we first started doing these surveys, yes, about 15 or so years ago, when we reasoned that there were a lot of things happening in the tech space and it was important for radio broadcasters to understand them. Little did we know what we were getting into, and you'll see some signs of that today when we sort of walk down memory lane. Just a couple of thank yous at the beginning to everybody from Jacobs Media, present and past. These days, Jason Hollins, Lisa Riker, Elnora Lowe. In the past, Tim Davis, who's responsible, good or bad, for a lot of the graphics that you're about to see, Bill Jacobs, and many others. We are recording this webinar, so that's cool. At the end of this, it will all be sent out to you probably tomorrow by the time we package it up and get it all together. But if you don't feel like taking notes, you can go back and somehow watch this again. If you're in a social media mood, my Twitter handle is down there on the lower left of your screen. So if you see stuff you like, great. If you see stuff that's kind of a head scratcher or stupid, here's your chance to express yourself socially. So let's jump right in and take a look at where the data has been taking us. So my background is originally in audience research. Before I became a program director and a consultant, I was talking to people both qualitatively in focus groups and one-on-one interviews and doing a lot of quantitative stuff. And when the email databasing movement kind of began in the 90s, that's when we started thinking, hey, you know, our email database might be not just a great source for letting people know about our 3-for weekends and our sales coupons, but also a base for research. And so that's why we started doing those. And my job now is to help put together a study that tracks what's going on out there, and then sort of be a data whisperer to be able to take that data and translate that into actionable recommendations for all of you. The reason that this is so important right now is that we're all trying to figure out how to use these new tools in the digital toolkit and which ones actually matter. We know that every radio station, whether you're part of a big company or a ma and pa, is limited when it comes to human and financial resources. And even if you're doing research, if you're one of the lucky stations that is still surveying your audience, chances are you're testing your music or the popularity of your personalities, and you may not have the resources to be able to figure out what the audience is doing when they're not listening to you. Things are moving quickly. I like to say kind of at Mach 2. Our mission with Techsurvey is to try and make sure that we're helping you produce a great radio product for your constituencies, your listeners, your advertisers, and of course the communities that you're licensed to serve, and making sure that you're connecting with and engaging these audiences so that your stations can stay relevant. And so the idea here is to try and find out how we can build a better understanding of the audience, the changes in media consumption that are taking place, and begin to adapt to them. Every radio broadcaster at this point is going through digital transformation, and you're going to see why that is so important today. I mean, the toothpaste is out of the tube, the horse is out of the barn. What other cliche can I come up with? But yes, things are moving very, very quickly technologically, and so companies now are looking at the landscape and trying to figure out what that digital transformation looks like. One of the things that we've learned, though, is that there's also an analog transformation that needs to take place, and that's the people part. And sometimes that's where the rub is, because you can have the best digital strategies, but if you can't effectively communicate them to your troops, your staff, you're going to encounter glitches, maybe even epic fails. The data in Techsurvey gives you the ammunition and the support to be able to sit down with your staff, the people who report to you, walk them through the reality that they're not going to see in Nielsen or Miller Kaplan, and kind of envision a successful future together. So that's really the underpinnings of Techsurvey. Now, you have to accept the fact, though, that this is not a normal audience sample like you might see in a Gallup survey or Pew Research or the Infinite Dial. That's where they will interview 1,000 people, and they'll make sure the sample absolutely matches the population. That is not what Techsurvey is, right? Because we are surveying people in radio station email databases, these are already people who should be pretty core radio listeners. Perito, the old Italian landowner who you see pictured here, is the guy who came up with the 80-20 rule that basically states 20% of a population contributes 80% of the results. And what you're going to be seeing here in all these Techsurveys, going all the way back to the very beginning, is the 20. The people who are filling out diaries, these are the people who are in meter panels, these are the people showing up at events, these are the people still very much actively engaged in radio. And so if we understand where they're at and what they're thinking, it goes a long way toward us being able to continue to outline a path of success for radio broadcasters. Now, when we first started doing Techsurveys, remember, we're a rock radio consultancy, and so all of the stations that participated were either classic rock, mainstream rock, or alternative stations. Several years ago, at the behest of the All Access team, we expanded Techsurvey out to 14 different formats, and you can see them all here on this slide. This has been a real game changer, as they say, for Techsurvey. We really are the only Techsurvey of any type that is segmented by format. We know how important that is to all of you to understand your format segment and to see how it compares with other stations in a similar, if not the identical format to what you're doing. So you're going to see some format breakouts this afternoon, and the whole idea here is to better understand your target audience. At the beginning, we just did this one Techsurvey for everybody, but as we discovered over the years, there are lots of different radio groups out there, and so we broke off and started doing a public radio version of this about 11 years ago. And you may see some Christian data from Christian music radio in the earlier years. In the last 5 or 6 years, we've segmented them off as well. And that's that CMB logo that you see on the bottom right for Christian music broadcasters. But Techsurvey, which you're going to see results from today, is sort of the granddaddy of them all, the big one. And so obviously we're very excited about our 2020 version, which goes into the field in early January. We would love to encourage you, if you haven't signed up, to register for it. You have time, but not a lot, and so we hope you will go to this URL. Well, I'll have more details at the end of this webinar, but we would love you to be a part of the survey, and it's really just absolutely simple and inexpensive to be able to do that. So stay tuned for details on that. You know, finally, none of us has a crystal ball. I mean, we can have radar, and to a great degree, that's what Techsurvey is all about. But as a consultant, I can tell you that certainly nobody bats 1,000. But when you've got a consistent data stream that tracks your community, your target audience, you can really see where the puck is in fact moving. And so you're going to see now what we've learned over the past 15 years, how it helps you better understand maybe what's ahead, to the degree that any of us can predict the future. And you'll see how our data has evolved and even our graphics have gotten a little better. So let's go all the way back to the beginning here. This is my favorite survey because it was the first. It was done in the spring of 2005. We actually had 53 stakeholder stations participate, just over 19,000 completed surveys here. And as I mentioned earlier, they were all rock stations of various kinds. 43% were classic rock. We had a bunch of active rockers and even 22% alternative stations. So this is a rock-based survey. As we came to find out, not really unrepresentative of the whole, but our more recent studies obviously combine many more different formats. Well, way back at the beginning, when this study started coming back from the field, we started thinking about the best ways to actually show the data so it would make sense. And Tim Davis, who, as I mentioned earlier, was the force behind these surveys in terms of setting them up and how they looked, came up with an idea of using a pyramid. And we've been using pyramids ever since. And the idea is that the media gadgets and activities that are at the bottom or the base of the pyramid are the things that people are involved with the most. And then as the pyramid goes up and narrows, those are the media gadgets and activities that people do the least. So here's the very first pyramid that we produced about 15 or so years ago. It's kind of small by today's standards because there wasn't as much technology out there as there is today, but each and every one of these bars is fascinating. If you look all the way down at the bottom of the pyramid, you'll see 93% of our samples say they listen to the radio 1 hour a day or more. Fewer were watching television at that point. Only 87% owned a cell phone. There weren't a whole lot of smartphones out there, a lot of flip phones, and only 87% of our overall sample had one. Look at the next bar. Only 84% actually used the internet on a weekly basis. This was back in the old dial-up days to a great degree, right? Lots of AOL and all that stuff. Instant messaging was a thing. 46% had used instant messaging in the prior week. Video gameplay was pretty popular. By the way, that's about the same level that it actually is now. Public radio, we actually asked about that prior to doing our own public radio survey. About a third of our sample listened to public radio every week. Only 1 in 4 people sent text messages back then. Texting was for young people. People who were mature couldn't figure out why people weren't picking up the phone to have conversations. What is this texting thing you're doing? Less than 1 in 4 listen to internet audio, internet radio on a weekly basis. iPods were really beginning to get more popular, but you can see this is very early on here. 17% owned an MP3 player. And then finally, satellite radio was 2 companies back then, Sirius and XM, and they accounted for only 7% of our overall sample. Well, one of the things that really came to a head with this very first tech survey was a question that we just sort of tossed in almost as a lark. We were interested in how many people had dropped their landlines back in 2004, 2005, and had become cell phone only. So if you look at that middle group of bars there, the people who say, yep, I'm cell phone only, you can see they were very much focused on 18 to 34s. 1 in 3 18 to 34s were cell phone only. Why was this important? Because back then, Arbitron, who was the ratings company of record, did not include cell phone onlys in their sample. And so the Arbitron Advisory Council used this data to begin to start pressuring Arbitron to start including cell phone only respondents, which eventually they did. But all that came out of this very first tech survey. So let's segue to year 2. Now we're up to 79 stations, about 26,000 people, and satellite radio is becoming a thing. Why is satellite radio becoming a thing all of a sudden? Because Howard Stern went to satellite radio about the month before. So there was a lot of focus on satellite radio, and you can see there was quite a bit of growth for both Sirius and XM from '05 to '06. We also asked people who didn't have satellite radio how likely they were to purchase it in the calendar year. And here are the very likelies, and you can see they are beginning to tip toward Sirius. We then asked both XM subscribers and Sirius subscribers, what are the main reasons why you like the satellite radio product? So here's XM, and as you can see, it was mostly driven by the music, although being commercial free and being on the road and obviously being a free perk when you get a new car, all part of the equation. What about reasons why people liked Sirius satellite radio at that time? Yep. This is the impact that Howard Stern brought to satellite radio, and we got to see it early on. Howard called me out on the show after we published this data, which is always sort of a mixed blessing, of course. It's nice to have that attention, but I won't tell you exactly what he said, but he actually felt pretty good about seeing these numbers back then because they very much justified all the money that he was being paid by Sirius, and you can absolutely see the ROI on Howard Stern early on for Sirius. Meanwhile, the cell phone only issue is heating up 1 year later, and when we begin to actually start breaking out '05 to '06, yellow to red here by format, you can see that there are some formats more affected by Arbitron not including cell phone only people in their sample. Alternative, of course, is the format most impacted. And here's the breakout by age, and correspondingly, you can see it's the 18 to 34s who are, in fact, more likely to be cell phone only, and at least at this point, not participating in radio ratings. All right, so here we are now. It's 2007. We're beginning to figure out this technology. Remember the pyramid from the very first year? It was pretty stark looking. All of a sudden now, technology is beginning to explode. That bar on the far right shows you last year's data. And so now we can go back and forth and actually see where some of the big changes are. I marked the two big findings here with those ugly red arrows. The first is streaming video, which we didn't even ask about the preceding year. YouTube had just come on board about 1.5 years or so ago. And so we included a streaming video question and series, and we learned, boom, in just the first year of asking the question, more than half our sample, 56%, streamed video on a weekly basis or more. So that was huge, and it continues to grow to this day. And then social media was beginning to happen as well. This was the moment when Facebook opened up from just being a college campus social networking service to something that all of us could take part in. And you could see that 44% at that time of our entire sample had a social media profile somewhere. So all of a sudden now, we're seeing technology begin to explode. For those people who actually were involved with social, here were the leading platforms, right? Hard to believe back then that it was all about MySpace. And you may remember the Murdochs, Rupert Murdoch bought MySpace around this time because it looked like a sure thing, an absolutely sure bet that it was going to be great. This is why if you watch Succession, you know why these people are so pissed off all the time. A lot of their decisions didn't quite pan out, and MySpace is one of them. Look who's bubbling under there at only 8%, good old Facebook. And look at some of the other social media platforms that we included. This is what was out there at that point. Now, remember I mentioned video as well. Here's what was happening in the video realm among those who actually stream video on a frequent or occasional basis. YouTube was already very quickly establishing itself as a category killer here. If you streamed video on any regular basis, chances were very good that you were already beginning to spend time on YouTube. Well, it's 2008, about 12, 13 years ago. We have 69 stations participating, 27,000 plus respondents. This is now just a few months before Apple opens its App Store in July of 2008. So this survey was done just a few months before apps came into existence. So the question was, what do people actually use their cell phones to do besides talking? And texting now is becoming much more popular. People are beginning to use their phones to take photos, but you can see with the red arrow there, something new is going on, and it's having an impact on broadcast radio listening, especially in the morning. People are using the alarm function and using it a lot. A majority are now using their cell phone in order to help wake them up. Now, as far as iPhone goes, remember, the Androids really barely existed at this point. So a lot of the focus was on iPhone. Only 3% of those who even had a cell phone had an iPhone at that point, with a little bump there for alternative fans and 18 to 34-year-olds. Again, not surprisingly that the younger respondents moving to the new technology, but it was really more about iPods and MP3 players at this point. And here you can see we've got some trending 2005 to 6 to 7 and now to 8, and you can really see the rampant growth of iPod-like devices at this time. Again, the whole idea of using a smartphone as an MP3 player had not kicked in, but of course it did, and it will. All right, we're up to 2009, 64 stations, 21,000 plus respondents. And now our pyramid is really getting uncomfortably crowded. There's so much stuff going on out there that we are literally stretching the perimeters of this slide. But there are three big things going on this year that are really noteworthy. One is text messaging on a cell phone is now up to 63%. And that's a big change over the year before. Social media now is done by half of all respondents. It's the first time it breaks that majority level, so that's important too. And then streaming audio also begins to start kicking in as well in a significant way. Almost 4 of every 10 people say they listen to internet audio on a weekly basis. And here is the trajectory of internet audio, internet radio streaming going back the first 5 years since we've been doing Techsurvey, and you can see there is definitely a trend. What are people actually streaming? This one's a little hard to read. It's got 3 years trended. But you can see the radio station Stream, the station that sent you the survey, very popular. Also, people streaming radio stations from the local area or around the U.S. But I put an arrow there next to Pandora because you can see the 3-year trend almost doubling every year. And this is when we really started to focus on, okay, what's going on with Pandora here and what kind of impact might it be having? On the social media front, now Facebook for the first time passes MySpace and did not look back at all. You can see LinkedIn sort of lingering around there, and look all the way down at the bottom. This is the very beginnings of Twitter. We also started becoming interested in cars at this point because cars were changing, especially in the dashboard part. And so we wanted to get an idea of what were the most desirable features when people were actually in the market for a new vehicle. So the good news, and believe me, we got this news out to the RAB and the NAB and to anybody in the automotive community that would listen. But even though AM, FM radios may not drag people into showrooms, they clearly are considered important mandatory features in cars, and you can see that here. And by the way, it looks pretty much the same to this day. I have some more recent data for you. CD player, gotta have one of those. 8 of every 10 mention that, but here's where you begin to see hey, I want to be able to plug my iPod into my car so I can actually listen to my tunes while I'm commuting to and from work. And so this is beginning to emerge here as a feature that people want in their cars. Then we get into GPS and navigation systems, DVD players, satellite radios bubbling under as well. But yeah, people are beginning to realize that their cars can be a big entertainment source above and beyond AM/FM radio. All right, we are now up to 2010, 78 radio stations, more than 26,000 respondents. Let's take a look at what is going on with streaming audio now. And we've got it trended out over the past 4 years. Up on top is the station that sent you the survey stream, then other stations in the area. But the reason I included this slide is for Pandora, because you can really see the growth here now. Pandora isn't just something that a minority of people are doing. More and more people are going to Pandora, the music genome, and they're creating their own music stations with their artists and all those kinds of things. So at this point, we're thinking, all right, Pandora is getting much more popular, but where are the kinks? Among those who listen to Pandora, what are the things that really turn them away or turn them off about listening to Pandora? Well, you can see way up at top, a plurality of people, 37% say, I have no problem at all with Pandora. It's just fine the way it is. The negatives that begin to emerge are not enough skips, missing human beings, and also just not having a sense of place like you would with the radio. So put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that whole idea of local being an important piece for broadcast radio. What's going on the smartphone front? Well, 29% of our overall sample up on top now actually have a smartphone of one kind or another, men a bit more than women. You can certainly see, though, when we look at our age groups, the smartphone revolution is being led, certainly at the beginning, by 18 to 34s. What kind of smartphones are people buying? Well, this was the first time that the iPhone or the iPod Touch actually jumped out over the BlackBerry. If you remember back to this time, the BlackBerry was the dominant phone, especially in businesses and in companies. I bet a bunch of you were BlackBerry fans at one point or another, but you can see this is where iPhone really dug in. And of course, at this point, we have already started Jake Apps, our mobile app development company. So we've got a lot of skin in this game. And so we start learning more and more about apps. And what we learned is that if you have a smartphone, 8 of every 10 people have downloaded apps at one time or another. Free apps, paid apps, you name it, but they are definitely there. And when we move into what kind of radio-based apps people like, yes, Pandora there and the Gold Slice, those kinds of apps are very popular. But umbrella apps like iHeart, mentioned by about 1 in 5, and then the kind of apps that we were making, apps for individual radio stations, are beginning to get a foothold as well. New question in Techsurvey 6, going all the way back to 2010, was about Christmas music, right? Because our surveys started now moving into the Jan-Feb zone, so it was the perfect way to find out what were people actually doing during the past December, the holiday season, in terms of radio. And so you can see just the overall impact. And again, remember, this is a rock-based sample here, and you can see just how powerful Christmas music was. 12% said it was about half my listening, 7% said most of my listening, and 3% said that's all I listened to during the month of December. So clearly a big deal. Well, now we're up to Techsurvey 7, 75 stations participate, 21,000 plus respondents, and this is the year we went a little infographics crazy. And you'll see that in the next few slides. Let's talk about social media. Social media is really beginning to explode. And the good news is, because we're doing these surveys every year, we can begin to get great tracking on social media platforms that have been around a while. So you can really see Facebook explode, LinkedIn, definitely way behind Facebook, but growing. Twitter now just beginning to come on. So everybody's trending up except for MySpace, which is now going straight down. Yes, the Murdochs are going crazy. This is not a good time for News Corp. How in God's name did we buy the leading social media company, and it is now about as big as Twitter? What kind of smartphones were people buying? Well, remember, the BlackBerry was pretty well positioned just a year or two before. It is now in distant third because Google has, in fact, developed the Android platform. Apple still has the lead with iOS, iPhones, but Android is coming on, and now BlackBerry is beginning to fall way back. How about these nifty infographics, huh? Pretty cool. So this is daily texting. And you can see how mainstream texting is becoming going back over the past 7 years. And we actually broke these out by format so you could definitely see what you intuitively know, that the younger audience, alternative fans, are more likely to be texting. All right, here we come to Techsurvey 8, and now things are beginning to grow because this is the first tech survey that is open to all formats. Now we've got 170 stakeholder stations. It's getting big, more than 57,000 respondents. And now we actually have some format tracking to be able to look at, not just with rock formats, but everywhere else. Well, one of the things that we began to really get a good understanding of was the Techsurvey was helpful in terms of giving us an idea of what kind of content people were consuming, but what it was also beginning to do was teach us about distribution, right? Content, absolutely king, but here's where we started thinking about distribution being very important too. Where are people going to get content? How important are phones? What's going on in the car? So now we can actually put together media usage pyramids here on all our different formats. And so here's mainstream AC. We had 5,200 plus of these people. That NPS thing that you see in the upper left there stands for Net Promoter, which is a recommendation score that we'll get into in a moment. But you can see by looking at the mainstream AC pyramid, there are some interesting things going on here. Note how big that band is for Groupon there in the middle. Groupon is now beginning to take shape as a tech shopping tool. And in the case of mainstream AC, a majority of our audience is into Groupon. Social media, also very, very strong with the female format as well. Here's country. We had 3,800 respondents the very first year that we introduced all formats. And again, this one is a little unspectacular in terms of differing from the norm, but the beauty was, and we were engaged and talking to a number of country PDs at this time, and getting this data on country fans was so critically important. So with all this media and technology going on out there, the question comes up, why are people still listening to the radio? I mean, when you can get any song that you want to hear on a streaming music source, and there's satellite radio with more than 100 channels, what is radio's job to do at this point? This is a Harvard professor by the name of Clayton Christensen, who has written this whole, a number of books about this whole idea that products, services, platforms need to accomplish a job for consumers. And so we wanted to find out, what is broadcast radio's job at this point, given all the technology out there? So we gave our sample in Techsurvey 8 a list of possible reasons why they still enjoy listening to AM/FM radio, and ask them to tell us what were the very main reasons that mattered. So look all the way down at the bottom, and you can see the number one driver why people still love to listen to broadcast radio back then was to hear their favorite songs. That was mentioned by more than half. 4 of every 10 mentioned DJs, personalities, and hosts. But this is where we began to make the emotional discovery that radio provided emotional benefits that you couldn't get from other media and other services. The idea that radio is great to work with, that radio is a mood elevator, that radio is about companionship, that radio is about escape. And so we've been tracking this data every year because it's critically important to understand what moves radio listeners now in this new tech environment. Well, meanwhile, now that we've got all these formats out there, we can actually break out all of our data by formats. So this is smartphone ownership, and you can see the funky little Jacobs media bar there tells you that 52% of our overall sample have a smartphone by Techsurvey 8. Formats to the left, though, run higher. Formats to the right run lower. And so you look all the way to the far left, and those are fans of alternative, CHR, rock, and sports leading the way. And then on the other side of the spectrum, all the way on the far right, we've got classic rock, Christian music, and AC. So this is the way we begin to start breaking out the data in Techsurvey. And we're using a variation of that right now, all these years later today. So we're beginning to get a sense that, especially with all the social media out there and the ability to be able to share stuff, that word of mouth becomes even more important to broadcast radio. And so we adapt, appropriate, okay, steal the Net Promoter Score. And it goes like this. The question is, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 means extremely likely and 0 means not at all likely, how likely are you to recommend the station that sent you this survey? A very high bar. Look all the way to the right. In order to be considered a promoter of the station, you got to give it a 9 or a 10. Detractors are 0s through 6s, and the calculation is on the bottom. You take your 9s and 10s, your promoters, you subtract the detractors, it's hard to say, 0s through 6s, and you come up with a Net Promoter Score. So here we are. You can see the overall total Net Promoter Score for the entire survey is a 42. Look to the left, classic rock is a 47, country is a 55, but look at contemporary Christian music radio, a 71. And this is where we began to start thinking, you know, maybe we want to do a separate survey for Christian music radio for a number of reasons, but certainly this was one of them. And so the beauty of Net Promoter is that not only did we get format averages, but stakeholder radio stations actually got a Net Promoter Score for their station. So if you're a classic rock station and you've got a 40 Net Promoter Score, that feels pretty good, except when you look at the classic rock average, you see it's 47, and you go, you know, we're lagging behind for some reason. So our stakeholder stations pay a lot of attention to these Net Promoter slides. Well, now we're really off and running here with all of our different formats, and that's when we begin to get the great idea of segmenting our survey by generations, right? There's all this talk about millennials now really kicking in versus boomers, and we're thinking, you know, we've been breaking everything out by age, and we will continue to do that, but generations is becoming really important as well. Now, this is a slide from just a couple of years ago that Nielsen put out. You look to the baby boomer column there near the bottom, 71 million people. I mean, this is why so much of pop culture over the last 50 years has been geared to baby boomers, because there's 71 million of them, right? But look at millennials. they're right there at almost the exact same level. And while we were all focused on millennials, look at what's going on with Generation Z, turning out to be absolutely the largest generation in our lifetimes. So this is why we continue to break out our data in generations. And so this was the first year that we did this. And you can see the way the sample actually laid out. Tim came up with these little graphic representations for each of these generations and standard colors. And so we were off to the races with generations, and we made up pyramids, not just by stations and formats now, but in fact by generation. So here are baby boomers from Techsurvey 9, and this was really a great source of learning at the time. Notice how many of them now are already gravitating to Facebook. We know that they dominate Facebook now, but you could see it coming all the way back at Techsurvey number 9, where almost 3/4 of boomers were on Facebook. Now, what was going on in millennial world, which we were calling Gen Y? Well, look how wide some of these usage bars are. I mean, they're crazy. Pandora up on top. 1 of every 3 millennials was listening to Pandora on a regular basis. Twitter was exceptionally popular among millennials back then. 3 of every 4 had a smartphone. Almost 9 of every 10 were on Facebook, and more than 9 of every 10 were texting all the time. So now with all this technology, we not only want to find out why do people still listen to broadcast radio, but what about the people who actually have cut back their listening to broadcast radio? What's the problem? What is repelling them? So a new question: if you say you've been listening to less AM FM radio in the past year, how come? So look all the way down at the bottom, and the number 1 reason is a lifestyle change. What does that mean? That means I moved to Tacoma. I switched jobs. I retired from work. It has nothing to do with radio, really. It has more to do with my lifestyle change. So we know that really is something we can't control as radio programmers and strategists. So let's look at the stuff that we actually can control. And you can see that the top 2 negatives, once we get beyond lifestyle change, are what we might call self-inflicted wounds or unforced errors, right? I just am not enjoying the programming I'm hearing, or wow, a lot of commercials there on radio. Now, what's interesting, though, is all the other stuff beginning to filter into the decision process. We labeled that at the time the tyranny of choice. But you can see all the different outlets now that people have in order to inform and entertain themselves besides the radio. So here's where things are beginning to get obviously more competitive. Well, you can see by the terminology here, we didn't quite get it exactly right. We were referring to systems like Ford Sync as a digital dashboard. About 1 in 10 respondents here in Techsurvey 9 drove a car with a system like this. Still very emerging technology. Again, you can see a little bit of a bump for various formats, but again, for the most part, this is very, very early on. Remember we talked earlier about what kind of features people want in new cars? Well, here we have this trended 2012 in blue, 2013 red, AM FM radio hanging in there. Absolutely the most desirable feature that people want to make sure is in their next car or truck. The numbers aren't moving at all, but what we can see happening is that there is movement toward connectivity. The iPod connector, Bluetooth now becoming more and more desirable, and then looking all the way down at the bottom with some of these newer technologies, wireless internet, the whole infotainment system, HD radio. They're still small, but they are trending up and definitely portend what we have seen now in recent years, that people really enjoy these features in their cars. We're also finding out now that there is more to life than just Facebook on in the social media world. Here are the most popular sites in Techsurvey 2012. Facebook absolutely dominating, as we can see. Here it is with 2013. Facebook clearly growing, no question about that. I mean, it's moving into the 90+% range. So this was about the high end. Meanwhile, MySpace is pretty much down for the entire count, but we're beginning to see some momentum for Twitter. We're clearly seeing momentum for Pinterest. Google Plus is in there as well. And all of a sudden now there's a new service called Instagram out there that we're beginning to track. And it's already ahead of MySpace. And then look all the way down at the bottom, the very first time that we've included Snapchat. Remember, we've been looking at some of the negatives about Pandora. Well, back in 2012, the #1 negative was I couldn't skip enough songs. But all of a sudden now in 2013, Pandora is beginning to sneak in commercial units. And you can see, not surprisingly, if you're in radio, it takes its toll, and it is now the #1 negative with Pandora is the fact that what was a commercial-free service is now playing commercials. Now we're up to Techsurvey 10. We referred to this one as the digital tipping point here because things now are really beginning to accelerate. No pun intended, more and more people now are driving what we are calling a connected car. Ford Sync, Chrysler Uconnect. It's now 1 in 5 respondents in Techsurvey. We're also trying something brand new here. We are asking people to think back to how they listened to their favorite station in the previous week, and we give them all the different places where they could listen to the station and ask them to tell us on a percentage basis where they actually spend their time listening to their favorite station. And you can see that half of all consumption to the favorite station is on a regular radio in cars. This is why the car is just so darn important to the radio industry. The #2 location is regular radio listening at home, work, or school. But we definitely have some action going on up here with digital in terms of streaming, mobile apps, podcasts bubbling under now. So overall, here are the totals. 80% of consumption to the average radio station is on a regular AM/FM radio, that's traditional. 17% is digital. We'll be back to that one. Lori Lewis has joined the company at this point, and she's trying to get a handle on what is the impact of social media acknowledgement and listening. So we come up with the agree-disagree statement. I find myself listening more to stations that interact with me socially. And what we learn is that 3 of every 10 people agree or agree strongly. It's the first time we had ever seen it quantified before. And you look off to the right, and you can definitely see the pattern there. Women definitely are more impacted by acknowledgement, as are progressively younger people. Here it is by format, and so formats above the little funky Jacobs media bar are clearly more likely to give you quarter hours if you acknowledge the audience socially. You see CHR way up there, followed by country, hot AC, alternative, and rock. We also tried something a little different with social media. We broke it up by sort of CUME and TSS, time spent socializing. So here is CUME. These are the sites where people actually have a profile, and you can see the big dog continues to be Facebook. Of those with a social media profile, 95% are on Facebook, followed by LinkedIn, Twitter, Google Plus is in there as well. But here's the time spent socializing slide. If you have a profile on any of these sites, are you visiting that site on a daily basis or more often? And this is why Facebook was such a monster. Not only was everybody on Facebook, but 3 out of every 4 Facebook users were there every day. None of the other social media platforms were anywhere near close. Instagram and Twitter a distant second with only 15% daily usage. We wanted to also help our clients understand the differences between Facebook and Twitter. So why do you love Facebook? Well, the number one reason is to connect with friends and family. Hey, we got a new dog. We just got married. Hey, look at these cool pictures from our trip to Barcelona. That's what Facebook is about. But when we actually looked at Twitter, it was a different motivation. It was more about following interesting people. Yeah, it's really cool. Malcolm Gladwell is on Twitter. I want to find out what he's talking about. So this is where we began to start helping stations better understand the dynamics of the different social media platforms. Something else happened in this survey that was significant. We had been asking about your propensity to share stuff that you saw online, whether it was in an email, on a website, social media. And you can see in Techsurvey 8, only 13% said they actually shared stuff frequently, went up to 17% the year before, and then all of a sudden it doubles. And we're like, whoa. What is going on there? And you can see that women and millennials much more likely to share. We were a little worried about our data until the next year, and it came in at almost the exact same levels. So something happened. Clearly, the internet just became easier for people to begin to move information and entertainment around, and people started moving into it. So now smartphones, right? They're a big part of our lives. We want to actually start quantifying just how addicting are smartphones. So agree, disagree. I'm addicted to my mobile phone. And you can see that more than a third agree or agree strongly. Clearly a tip to females here. And then also the younger listeners, Gen Z and Gen Y, definitely addicted to their smartphones. Now we're up to Techsurvey 11. We're up to 220 stations, more than 41,000 respondents, and our media usage pyramid now is in a different zone. We actually break it up and we create two pyramids. So this is the first, and it looks a lot like the ones that you've seen before. These are media, gadgets, and activities. The second pyramid, which you'll see in a moment, are brands, like Facebook or YouTube or Netflix. But these are big, broad categories. And I just put gold stars next to some of them that are just really beginning to get huge. The good news is, look near the bottom, radio listening is very, very steady in spite of all the technology floating around out there. But now 8 of every 10 have a smartphone. 2/3 are streaming video on a weekly basis. Tablets now are really kicking in. 6 of every 10 people have a tablet. Almost 6 of every 10 are streaming audio. MP3 players are beginning to get a little soft here. And now smart TVs are coming in and people are buying internet connected televisions. But as I mentioned, the big change this year was we started actually creating a pyramid that was all about weekly usage of brands. And so down at the bottom, there's broadcast radio again at the same 92% level. But the top brand is Facebook. 7 of every 10 are there weekly. YouTube, very, very strong. A majority of the audience goes to YouTube on a weekly basis. And the other one that we thought was very interesting was Netflix, which now is streaming video full time. They're not really sending CDs and DVDs and those little red envelopes through snail mail. They are streaming video now, and you can see that about 1/3 of all of our respondents are using Netflix on a regular basis. Well, we like to have fun with pyramids here at Jacobs Media, and so here is the brand pyramid, the first one we've ever done, and millennials are on the left and baby boomers are on the right because we want to understand how the different generations use different brands. So a symbol of millennials at this point was Mark Zuckerberg, and so I've put a little Zuck next to every one of these brands that millennials use quite a bit more than do boomers. And you can see there's a whole lot of Zucks on the left-hand part of the page there. YouTube, Facebook, public radio, Netflix, Pandora. Look at Instagram near the top. I mean, clearly a millennial brand. What about boomers? What brands do they use more than millennials? Well, we use John Lennon as our boomer symbol, and the only two areas that really jump out here is satellite radio subscribership. That's something that a more mature audience tends to do, and then LinkedIn. One of the constants in Techsurvey is underscoring the importance of radio's local orientations. Agree, disagree. One of radio's primary advantages is its local feel. 8 of every 10 agree or agree strongly. And what's really remarkable about the right-hand side of that chart is that there's nothing remarkable about it at all. Everybody feels the same way, whether you're 20, whether you're 70, whether you're a male, whether you're a female, you agree that radio being local is part of the charm. Here's a new question we had never tried out before. Would you be willing to sign up, provide your name, email address, and a zip code in order to stream your favorite radio station? This is when we're beginning to start thinking about data and accountability, and we learn, hey, this is pretty cool. 2/3 of those who actually listen to the station stream say, yep, I would be happy to be able to register and give this information out. So this is good, and we definitely talk about this quite a bit when this survey comes out. Well, remember we had talked early on when people started using their cell phones as alarm clocks? Now we're actually asking, what is going on here? How do you wake up in the morning? And you can see already a lot more people are using their phone to wake up than they are a clock, radio, or some other way. And so we actually have a tie at 40%. 40% of the sample uses a clock radio to wake up, 40% use a mobile phone. But where that really comes into play is when we look at generations here, because now you're looking at people who wake up to a clock radio. Yes, they tend to lean older, boomers and those in the silent generation born in 1946 or earlier. And then on the right, people who wake up with a mobile phone, and you can definitely see the generational trajectory there. We have continued to see that, as you'll see in a few moments. Techsurvey 12, 245 respondents, 39,000 plus, 245 stations, 39,000 plus respondents. And now we're beginning to look at what about radio ownership in people's homes? We know people have radios in their cars. Now remember, this is a radio-centric sample. 89% say they have a radio where they live, but look at millennials, only 78% of them do. So now we're really beginning to think we better track this, and we in fact will in 2020, and we have over the past several years. Remember how frequent sharing had jumped out into the mid-30s way back in Techsurvey number 10? Well, you can see that in 11 and in 12, frequent sharing continues to grow. And that's why we say to our clients and our stakeholders, it is important when you post content to make sure that it is easy to share. This is how you grow your audience and grow engagement. Women are more likely to share clearly than are men. On demand now is becoming more and more important, and so of course we're measuring it. On-demand TV viewing, thanks in no small part to Netflix, but even TiVo boxes becoming more important. And so among those who actually do any kind of TV watching with DVR or on demand, we're asking them how much of your TV viewing on a regular basis is on demand. 6% say all of it is, about a quarter say most of it is, and about a fifth say half of it is. When we actually break out those who say that half or more of their TV viewing is on demand, look what happens. We definitely see the hard skew toward young people way into TV on demand before anybody else got there. And look all the way down at the bottom. If you're into video on demand, that also translates to being into audio on demand, better known as podcasting. And so now we're really beginning to get deeper into measuring podcasting. Serial has come out. People are talking about podcasting again. We are measuring it in deeper and more meaningful ways. And you can see when you look at the generations there, clearly it is millennials at this point driving podcast usage. But I also drew that red dotted line around people who use video on demand services like Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, and Amazon Prime. Yep, they are the same people who in fact are listening to a lot of podcasts. We wanted to find out, with all the competition going on in people's cars, what kind of audio are they listening to when they are on four wheels driving around? So we asked them to think about an average weekday, and you can see the lion's share of listening when people are actually in a car is to AM/FM radio. That's 66% of all consumption. And then way back, satellite radio, personal music collections, and then we get into the streaming, Pandora, all that stuff. So you look at this and you go, wow, this is great. AM/FM radio is really surviving the challenge, and it is. But when you isolate people who actually drive a connected car, a system like Ford Sync, watch what happens. AM/FM radio precipitously drops, and look at who the big winner is. It's not streaming, it's satellite radio. Satellite radio is clearly the winner here, and we think that part of the reason why is that a lot of people hadn't experienced it until they got the free trial. And the other part is that satellite radio is very easy to use, as easy as it is AM/FM radio, right? Whether it's discovery or search. We are beginning to do our dash conferences now. We are very much focused on what is happening in the car, especially when people drive off with those newfangled systems. The question is, are they being properly trained at the dealership level? And what we find out is that 8 of every 10 rarely, if ever, change the settings on their radios or media systems. Once they are set at the beginning, they tend to be there. So this is why it is so important that car dealers continue to be reminded of the importance of broadcast radio listening, especially when people drive out of the showroom with a new vehicle. Vinyl's beginning to make a comeback. We are tracking that as well. I regularly listen to vinyl records. I mean, not a huge percentage of people, right? 14% agree or agree strongly, led by men. But what's interesting is generationally, you see millennials as into vinyl as baby boomers are, which really kind of shows you the hip aspect of what is going on when it comes to vinyl and turntables. Well, now we're moving up into the modern era here. This is Techsurvey number 13. This is 2017, so this is not that long ago, navigating the media landscape. And one of the things that we learn here, remember the question we've been asking about why are people still listening to broadcast radio with all this other stuff out there? We add a new potential answer and it explodes. Why do you love listening to AM/FM radio? Because it's free. In a world where people are paying more and more for Spotify and for Netflix and satellite radio and all this other content, broadcast radio is free. And look who leads the charge there. People who are probably the most financially strapped, the younger end of the sample, are saying, yep, that really is a factor for me. You've seen this pie chart before. This is how people are listening to the average radio station. Traditional listening now, people listening on a regular radio is down to 74%. Digital now, streaming on a computer, mobile apps, podcasts, up to 22%. Last year, you can see traditional was higher, digital was lower. And when we actually go back and we look at the last 5 years, you can really begin to see why it is so important for broadcast radio companies and broadcast radio stations to make sure their content is readily available, accessible, and certainly of a high quality on digital platforms, because listening on regular radios is off about 11 points, and conversely, listening digitally is up about 8 points. So this is something, I've got the recent data from this last year's study that I will show you. How are people actually streaming stations like yours? Well, almost 3/4 are still streaming off the website, but look at the action for station apps. And obviously, from a JCAP standpoint, this makes us feel good because we know that a lot of streaming is being done on station apps. So we've been tracking internet television and Netflix, but what about the percentage of people who identify themselves as cord cutters? They used to be pay TV subscribers. They have cut the cord. That's 12% of our overall sample. And the arrow shows you the entire story here. The younger the audience, the greater the likelihood that they have, in fact, cut the cord. What's going on in podcasting? What's going on in podcasting is that it is beginning to grow. 1 in 10 say they listen to a podcast every day. A similar percentage listen to a podcast every week. But look at the big red slice of the pie. About half of our sample say, I never listen to podcasts. We'll come back to them. But the people who listen daily and weekly, it's 21%. And again, millennials definitely leading the charge. This is why, for a lot of radio companies and radio stations, no doubt that having a millennial or a Gen Z strategy is so important. What are people doing when they're listening to podcasts? Well, a lot of them are just sort of hanging out at home, but many of them are in the car. And of course, this is critically important to those of us in broadcast radio because we know an awful lot of radio consumption takes place while people are on four wheels. So this is the first year now that we're actually getting into smart speakers. We're just sort of poking around a little bit. What does overall penetration look like? Well, it already looks pretty good, right? 1 in 10 already own in 2017 a smart speaker. And what's really interesting when we look down the demographic groups here, there's not a whole lot going on. This is a technology that is not being early adopted by millennials. Everyone's kind of going into the pool at around the same rate at this point. What about overall using voice commands on any device, not necessarily on an Amazon Echo, but maybe on a phone or in a car? So the question is, how often do you use the built-in voice command feature on devices that you own? Already 1/5 say frequently, and about 1/4 say occasionally. We broke out the frequentlies here by people who own various devices, and the one I want to kind of draw you to is people who own smart speakers. Obviously, they're getting into voice. Half of them use voice commands on one device or another. Remember this question from a couple of years back now? I am addicted to my mobile phone. Well, now it is really moving up. 4 of every 10 people agree or agree strongly, still led by the young generation. But now Xers, half of them are saying, yeah, I'm addicted, no question about that. What about what's going on in the car? Here is the question. During an average weekday, about how much of your total AM/FM radio listening takes place while you're in a car? 1/5 say all of it does, 1/3 say most of it does. So looking at the alls and the mosts, here's where you can definitely see the generational story. For a lot of younger people who may not even have a radio where they live, radio in the car becomes absolutely critically important. We haven't talked about Pandora in a few years, so let's come back and take a look at what's happening Pandora versus Spotify. Now, keep in mind, we don't have a ton of teens in our sample because there's not a ton of teens listening to the radio stations that are stakeholders here. We've got CHR, but still not a big part of our sample. And you can see Spotify is still lingering well behind Pandora until you actually break out the generations. And here's where you can see how Spotify has really taken off and replaced Pandora to a great degree. This is the first year that we ever asked about online holiday shopping, and given what is going on with Black Friday and Cyber Monday, we continue to ask this question. Remember, the survey is done Jan-Feb, so it's easy for people to remember what they did in the previous holiday season. How much of their gift shopping was online? 7% say all of it, 33%, a third, say most of it, and about a fifth say half of it. So on the right here, we can see people who say half or more of my shopping was e-commerce sites. And again, you can see that generational split that we have become so used to. Well, now it's last year, a year or so ago, Techsurvey 2018. And the reason that I'm showing you the brand pyramid here is that something really amazing is beginning to happen. The three big growth brands all have a little something in common. Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Hulu. All subscription, on-demand video streaming, all exploding. Look at the last year percentages over there on the right. Hulu from 9 to 19%, Amazon Prime 17 to 24, and Netflix 41 to 52. We are clearly going to look back at 2018 as being the year when on-demand video streaming really took off. You've seen this slide before. This is the features that you have to have in your new car, but here's the difference. We broke up FM radio and AM radio into two different answers. And look what happened. 8 of every 10 people say, I got to have an FM radio in my next car. But only 37% say the same thing about AM radio. And then the other thing that's happening is look at the desire for connectivity features like Bluetooth, the smartphone connector, voice commands now, right? All of that is really beginning to happen. Podcasting, now we're beginning to see a little bit more growth. Those numbers are still fairly significant, though, as we can see, but definitely the dailies and the weeklies now, up to 23%. Again, millennials leading the way. But we wanted to find out, what about this group, this big group of 45% who say, I never listen to podcasts? What is going on with those folks? Well, the biggest reason, and we think it's just an excuse for I have no idea what I'm doing, is I'm just not interested in podcasts, likely because I just haven't figured out what they are. But then we do get into some of the clunkiness of podcasts. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to find them. I don't really know what a podcast is. There's not a podcast app on my phone. And so these are some of the same barriers that exist today. All right, here's the second year for smart speakers, and you can see ownership has pretty much doubled. We are seeing a little bit more young action than we were in the previous year. Now we want to get into use cases. What are people actually using smart speakers for? So the number one use case is asking general questions. Number two is, what's the weather in Detroit? But look at number three, listening to music from an AM, FM radio station. And this is why so many people in radio are excited about smart speakers, because as broadcast radios are disappearing from people's nightstands and garages and everything else, they are being replaced by smart speakers, and people are in fact listening to broadcast radio. Well, I don't have to tell you, we live in a political world, and we wanted to find out back in 2018 what people's political party affiliations were. We saved this question for the very end because we didn't want to tick anybody off with the question itself. So here's how we looked in 2018 with political party affiliation. There were more Republicans than Democrats, but as you can see on the left-hand side, there's a lot of people who claim either no affiliation or prefer not to answer. We are going to repeat this question in Techsurvey 2020 next month. And so here is last year's survey, this year's survey, the most recent survey that we have. We had more than 500 radio stations participate, more than 50,000 respondents. Thanks to all of you, Techsurvey is really exploding. Here's the question that you've seen a couple of times already over the years. Why do people listen to broadcast radio, right? It's easy to listen to in the car is number one. It's DJ shows and hosts are number two. It's free, you can see there was the big number 2 reason. And then we get into a lot of the emotional factors that we've talked about before. They haven't really changed all that much. That whole piece of companionship, mood elevation, what's going on in the local marketplace, all of that continues to matter in a big way. What about our listening platforms? Well, you can see traditional continues to shrink. People are using AM/FM radios to listen to your station less than they ever have before. Digital is up to 31%. But where it gets really dramatic is if we track the last 7 years of traditional, the blue line, with digital, the green line, and you can absolutely see the pattern here. So the real question is, at what point do these two lines cross each other? What year is it going to happen where digital listening to the average radio station is going to actually equal or surpass listening on a regular radio? We're going to have to keep doing tech surveys in order to find out. Here's what's going on with podcasts this year. It's not really growing. When you look at the cume of people who say, I listen to podcasts on a weekly basis, it's sort of flatline. Now, again, millennials and Gen Zs are supporting podcasting to a great degree. But what's going on here? The cume of podcasting doesn't appear to be growing. But what is growing is time spent podcasting. We asked regular podcast listeners in the last year if you've been listening to more, less, or about the same amount of podcasts. 4 of every 10 say, I'm listening to more. And that's trending up. So once people get into podcasts, they are all in. How do they discover podcasts? Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of tech ways that podcasts can be discovered, browsing through iTunes or looking around on Spotify or going to a podcasting app. But as you can see, the top 2 methods of referral, ideas of how to discover a new podcast, are word of mouth from friends, family, coworkers, whether it's in person or online. We know from our focus groups that, hey, have you heard any good podcasts lately, is becoming a similar question to, hey, what are you watching on Netflix? Very similar conversation. Well, look what's happening in Alexa world. It continues to grow. No gender story there. Millennials and Xers are clearly leading the way, but look at what's going on with boomers. 1 in 4 of them have a smart speaker, and there's no difference between those who listen to music stations or spoken word stations. Chances are they've got a smart speaker just like everybody else does. Here's a question, because we were concerned that stations maybe weren't making it as clear to the audience about how to make sure that their content is available on smart speakers. So the question is, have you heard any AM/FM radio stations talking about or promoting smart speakers on the radio recently? Yeah, almost 4 of every 10 say they've heard that. And that's up quite a bit from the year before. So that is a good sign that radio is educating its audience about podcasts. Something new last year that we're going to continue to track is the privacy issue. Agree, disagree. I'm concerned about the ways in which tech companies are using my personal data. Almost 8 of every 10 agree or agree strongly. And look where the angst is. It leans male, and it also leans older. Interesting, the younger generation maybe is already resigned to the fact that they don't have a whole lot of privacy. So how does that manifest itself, for example, with what's going on these days with Facebook? So here's the question: which of the following best describes what you're doing on Facebook? And you can see in red there, about 1/5 say that they're seriously considering deleting Facebook, getting off of Facebook because of privacy concerns. There's also 3% who have already deleted their Facebook profile. And when we look at those who are in that serious consideration of deleting Facebook, again, we can definitely see they lean a bit male, but there's generational support up and down. So what kind of impact does privacy have on a radio station like yours? Well, remember the question that we introduced a few years back about willingness to register for the radio station stream? It was as high as 71% and then was kind of in the mid 60s, but now we see a trend all the way down to 60%. And we believe very strongly that a motivator there, a big reason why people are becoming less willing to give us that information, are privacy concerns. One of the big findings of this last tech survey is that while we were all worried about Spotify and everything else, satellite radio has in fact been making a very strong comeback. You probably know they bought Pandora a year and change ago. They also put together a great program with Amazon so that you can now listen to any Sirius or XM channel if you're a subscriber on an Amazon Echo device. So what kind of impact might that be having? Well, overall, about 1 in 4 has a satellite radio subscription. And you can see upper right, that is trending ever so gradually up year after year. Men are more likely to be satellite radio subscribers, as are progressively older people. It's interesting that the satellite radio audience mirrors the broadcast radio audience more than any other technology. And you can see that with the two formats there. Look what's up on top. The formats that are most likely to have satellite radio subscribership: spoken word, sports radio, and news talk. So where are people listening to satellite radio? Remember, forever, it has been an in-car service, right? And so we're looking at 2018 to 2019, and more than 8 of every 10 say, yep, I listen to a lot of satellite radio when I'm in a vehicle. But look at what is going on at home. We're beginning to see perhaps the beginning of a trend. And this may have something, in fact, to do with the Amazon Echo platform being able to access any satellite radio channel wherever there is Alexa. New question this year. We think this is important. How interested are you in purchasing your favorite station's merchandise, logo wear, shirts, hats, all that kind of stuff? So where I want to direct your attention is this light blue slice here, which is 27% saying, I'm not sure whether my favorite station even makes logo wear their own merch, but I sure would be interested in purchasing it. We think that's a really big number. And you can see it leans young, it leans Hispanic, and it leans African American. We are talking a lot to Techsurvey stakeholders about reigniting merch programs for great brands. So what's going to be in Techsurvey 2020? Thanks for still being here. I know this is a long presentation, but hey, it's greatest hits, and we wanted to show you as much as we possibly could. We're going to dig deeper into smart speakers and voice. Obviously, podcasting is going to continue to be a big topic. What is going on in the dashboard, especially with systems like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, social media and privacy. You saw me tee that up the last couple of years. What's going on with Facebook? Are people really getting off now? And what is certainly happening with young people? What is going on with subscription services? And are people beginning to max out with their credit cards in terms of how much content they're actually paying for? What's going on with video games, specifically esports? Of course, we're going to talk about perceptions about broadcast radio, so important. We're going to have new questions about hearables, AirPods, and other Bluetooth listening devices here as they continue to get more popular. Headphone usage is going to be an area that we have asked about before, but we're bringing it back now that Nielsen is, in fact, doing their own study about the incidence of headphone listening and whether, in fact, in metered markets, in PPM markets, stations may not be getting their full due. What else? You tell me, and I'm going to put my email address up in a moment. If we're missing something, there is still time to make sure that our Techsurvey 2020 questionnaire reflects that. One of the big things for me as I follow Techsurvey every year is to think more and more about the listener here and making sure that she has a voice in overall strategic planning at the station or the corporate level. And this is something that Jeff Bezos of Amazon does. He will drag an empty chair into every key meeting at Amazon, and that chair represents the customer. And I think that really is not just a great metaphor, but a great lesson to all of us about the importance of the consumer. So for Techsurvey 2020, we're going to be measuring 14 formats, 2 ways to participate. You can pay us this fee based on market size, and what that gives you is the national data, format data, and your station's local data. Or if you're a little cash strapped, you can participate at no fee. You get the national and format data, and you get to be a part of all the webinars. All you really need is a good email database. Survey dates are beginning of Jan to beginning of Feb. Please sign up soon. We're trying to kind of figure it all out and lay it out. As you can tell, with more than 500 radio stations, it's a gargantuan project. Go to jacobsmedia.com/techsurvey in order to learn more and to register. And if you have any questions, you can shoot me an email, fred@jacobsmedia.com. I am going to present a version of this as I have the last 10 years at the Worldwide Radio Summit in Los Angeles in March. So hope to see you there. And again, thank you so much for being here today. We very much appreciate it. I'd like to thank everybody at Jacobs Media who worked so hard on the development of Techsurvey, our friends at All Access for supporting us as well. Happy New Year, happy holidays, be safe, and we'll talk to you back in January. Thank you.